This is Judith Royal, archetypal astrologer, and this is your astrology weather forecast for the week of, or a couple weeks actually, of March 22nd, 2020. So as I was thinking about how I could convey to you in just a few words or few paragraphs the tension in the choices that are before us right now, the ones that we are making on the other side of that big 500-year new cycle, the shift that was exact in January of 2020. So I thought about a very impressive story that my granddaughter told me a few years back. Now, she lives high in the Rocky Mountains, sort of living and playing at about 10,000 feet. But while I was visiting her one time and we were out for an after-school snack, I asked her about how her school day went. And she told me that they had just completed a unit studying avalanches, and that the teacher had told the story and shown a video of 4 high school students who were snowboarding on one of the back trails in Vail, Colorado, where she lives. As they were coming down the mountain, they paused at a cliff of snow, trying to decide whether or not to trust its strength to hold them. And at that very moment, a large piece of the ledge started breaking away, and one of their classmates was on the downhill side of it. Throughout this video footage that someone had managed to capture, you can hear his friends yelling, "Go, go, go," and cheering him on to go faster and faster down the hill in front of the oncoming snow. They were watching him going as fast as he possibly could. And at one point, they're so excited and they're cheering because it looks like he's outrun it. He must have been feeling some of that same confidence himself, because just for a split second, he turned and looked behind him. And that was just enough hesitation for that avalanche to overtake him. Now, please understand, that high school student did absolutely nothing wrong. He did not make any mistakes. He did what most of us humans would do. He looked back at one point to see how big the threat still was. No, the point I want to make is that sometimes in nature, just by the way that events unfold that are outside our personal control, a danger moves in towards us at a pace that is faster than we can adapt to. There's just not enough time to learn what's really there that's coming after us. So the backstory we have right now from the planets is this tension that we feel from a forward-moving Aries fire, a big energy that is unfortunately at odds with this ongoing pileup of Capricorn planets. We still have 4 of them there. And that's that energy of the deliberate, persevering mountain goat who brought us to the edge of the new 500-year cycle that we're shifting into. So the Aries New Moon coming towards us on March 24th, 2020, is particularly important because this is, first of all, it's the first new moon of spring. So it's marking the time that the Aries sun meets up with the Aries moon. And we are still just a few days past the spring equinox, which has us finding our balance between dark and light, which seems quite a daunting task right now. And around March 20th, we got a booster that hopefully mobilized us to take some action, and that's going to turn out quite fortunate. So you might want to think what you were motivated to do this past week. But the biggest shift here during these Ides of March comes from that big ring planet Saturn, who's been the sheriff in Capricorn up until March 21st, when he made a big move and completed his time in Capricorn and moved into Aquarius. So we find ourselves in sort of an astrological danger zone. That peak is around March 22nd, but you'll really feel it on the new moon, the 24th, because there's this huge load of aggressive, fiery, combative energy coming from Aries warrior, and that's he's wielding lots of energy, but in a tense square with Saturn. There's, between both of them, just not enough willingness to compromise, to see the other person's side of things. So no corrective action is coming forth. In fact, there's a bit of fence sitting still, which, believe me, if you're still sitting on a fence with any big decision in your life, it's just going to get more and more uncomfortable now that we're on the other side of this shift. Now, in light of this pandemic of the coronavirus, bear with me while we take another look at the 500-year cycle, and let's take another look at the events in the 1500s. So if you've followed with me, you know I've talked a great deal in the past year, maybe more, about this shift and about the fact that 500 years ago was the time of the Protestant Reformation, the beginning of it, and in that eventually would bring the challenge to the divine right of kings that had been cruel and oppressive for centuries. Now, the key item that we see repeating now, so that we can learn a different, hopefully a higher octave of the energy. In the divine right of kings, the difficulty, one of the difficulties, was that no matter what the king did, even if it was beheading an entire village, there could be no repercussions for him. In other words, he's exonerated because he hid behind the mask of getting the message of what to do directly from God. And who could question that, right? And so my early write-up about President Trump, when he came into office, and I did the astrology of his birth chart, I titled that one King of the Mountain, because it's a game about power-mongering, greed, and abusing personal power for personal gain. Also, of course, abusing the power of office, also for personal gain. And what is radically different now from the 1500s is that we have a democracy. So that now invoking divine authority to exonerate yourself from wrongdoings, well, it should not be able to fly, but I guess in some ways it has. Really, when I did Donald Trump's chart, I said back then he would never be impeached because of his silver spoons and lucky horseshoes, but it had never occurred to me that he could be impeached and still stay in office. So we have many new phenomenon that I never saw coming. In any case, when the shift was at its peak, I was watching for the manifestation here on Earth of the archetypal energies of that sheriff Saturn and powerful Pluto getting together side by side. In my last forecast, I told you about one of the things I noticed because it landed right at the noon hour of the January 10th lunar eclipse, which was the 3-day period, January 10th, 11th, and then the 12th, which was the actual meetup. I saw the manifestation of that energy in which a man in power, using the power of his office to literally get away with murder. And that example that I gave you in my last forecast was about Iran shooting with its missiles, sort of accidentally encountering and downing a large passenger plane. And then, of course, trying to lie about it. But the people of Iran, different than the protest 500 years ago, the people of Iran did not go home until they had forced their own government to tell the truth. A very good sign. But one manifestation that I missed, and I only got to see this in hindsight, there was another very major event, as it turns out, that occurred on January 11th, right in the middle of this shift. And that was the day, January 11th, that the first death from the COVID-19 virus was announced. This, too, has an echo back 500 years ago, because the second event that I've been talking about was the landing of Cortez in Mexico and the subsequent destruction of over 80% of the Aztec nation. This was over a 2-year period. And here, of course, Cortez was on a mission of greed and domination from Spain to claim the land that the Aztecs were living on. And they did this with violence and rifles initially, but inadvertently, the bigger weapon turned out to be much more powerful, which was smallpox. It turned out that smallpox, because the native people had no natural immunity, wiped out. Cortez landed in February of 1519 with 500 men, and by the time his conquest was over, the Aztec empire of 16 million people were dead. We're in the age of technology already in this century, and now this shift is bringing us firmly into global citizenship and a global village. And the challenges within that context are that the distribution of power needs to become equal, so that there's no longer the ability or the overriding energy of abuse of power. And I found also this very interesting quote by in Cafe Astrology about this shift, and it's almost uncanny. I wish I had said this, but anyway, the initial intention of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is to increase value and empower systems but it is easy to mismanage these influences because they demand high ethical leadership. And without that, we face the prospect of severe economic recession. I suppose we might have imagined a pandemic coming along to affect that economic recession, because we apparently still haven't learned the lesson about vaccinations, and it's been in the news as we led up to this January. From the World Health Organization last year, they said that the hesitancy about vaccination is one of the top 10 threats to global health. So that was last year, and in fact, they also went on to give some numbers about that half of us do not even bother to get the flu vaccine, which the flu itself last year killed tens of thousands of people. So one of my takeaways from all of this is that, once again, we do not want to make any decisions out of fear. In fact, now in 2020, we are all called to the role of being everyday heroes. Really, this is our calling now. We can feel it in the experiences of wonder and awe at the beauty of all creation, even the beauty of all these people coming together to help those in need and those who are suffering. Mythology, like astrology, can be used as a symbolic bridge to help us get better acquainted with our higher mind, with our collective consciousness, that place where all thoughts are shared. And when we think about the current world crisis, and there are many, it may feel like a heaviness, like the weight of the world on our shoulders, for example. I've certainly felt that days here, looking at all the news. And yet, vision, our healed perception for 2020, is that the weight on our shoulder, those pounds, can be shared by 7.8 billion other minds. So let's just do the math. If there's a 1 pound weight that you are carrying, and if you distributed that just among 7 billion people, it comes to something like minuscule 0.00002. So isn't sharing such a grand idea? The math works especially well with the weight of grief. For example, 176 deaths on that passenger plane, divided by 7 billion mourners, comes to a minuscule ounce of tears and heavy sighs. All of this idea, it has been best said by Martin Luther King Jr. In August 28th of 1963. He said, "In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Isn't that brilliantly prophetic? And isn't that exactly what we find ourselves in now? And the really good news is that caring, that kindness and love is also highly contagious. Thanks for listening. And you can always reach me, email Judith at judithroyal.com. Bye for now.